One in five suffer.
Erase the stigma.
Brain difference is not a crime.
Mental health isn't just your problem.
It's our problem.
And now, Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
Welcome to Mental Health Mondays with
Marla
and Dave. That was a little anticlimactic there,
because
Marla.
I was going to say, we are, but then I said with, and then Marla, never mind.
Yeah, well, no explanation needed. Welcome to the show. We want to remind you to text the word GIVE. That's GIVE to 818-698-1021 and support our A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign. He's an actor, a comedian, and an author with a new book, a memoir, set to be released this fall called No Job for a Man. And that's a very interesting title, and we'll have to talk to him about that. Our guest today is John Ross Bowie. John will share his story with us, and like most of us and our guest, John, because of his experience, is now a mental health warrior with an end goal in mind, and that is, like we always say, to erase the stigma surrounding mental health. We can't wait to talk to John Ross Bowie. When we come back, he'll be our guest. Don't move.
When Dave and Marla get together.
Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley believe it doesn't take much to make life a little better for our neighbors, coworkers, friends, our family members, even our children who suffer with mental illness. When you support our A Dollar Today Keeps the Stigma Away campaign, you are doing your part to erase the stigma surrounding mental illness. For just $1 today, or $1 a day for 1 week, just $7, we can look forward to a future that does not include the unfortunate and uncomfortable stares, bullying, and the subsequent isolation that our loved ones who suffer with brain differences deal with. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to 818-698-1021 to donate. A dollar today keeps the stigma away. Brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave and NAMI San Fernando Valley. Mental Health Mondays.
Hey guys, listen up. Learn something.
Welcome. Well, as Dave said, don't move, because when we come back, we'll be able to welcome our guest, and this is our official welcome.
Mr. John Ross Bowie.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I have to be careful today, and I'll tell you why. My wife was a comedian, and what I've learned is to be very careful around if I start joking a little too heavy, usually you guys can cut quicker, deeper, while I'm still smiling. It takes me about maybe 20 minutes to realize, I'm bleeding out here, because
John,
they're comedians and I'm not.
No fear here. I used to make people laugh. Now I'm just laughed at inside my family. That's the way it works.
It goes both ways. That's this too shall pass. No, I'm not expecting to cut anyone on this podcast. Just happy to be here.
Cutting happens. It's okay.
And when we say cutting, we're using that as a euphemism to telling jokes. So for those of you who are about to get a little serious, well, John, we want to dive right in. Outside of the fact that you use all three names, is that significant, or is that just?
It's a really, really boring reason. If you'd like to hear it,
I want to hear it.
There is an actor named John Bowie, Bowe. And every time I see his name, I do a double take.
Right.
So when I joined the Screen Actors Guild 20 plus years ago, I thought, how can I keep myself from being mistaken for British actor John Bowe? And I said, I'll toss in the middle name there. And I made it as quick and painless as I possibly could. That story, not that interesting.
There you go. Anyway, well, I tell you one of my own. My name is Dave Thomas. So I was trying to purposely get myself confused with the creator
Dave
of Wendy's.
Thomas for Wendy's. So, I'm like, every time I go,
there's the guy from Wendy's, and there's also a Canadian comedian by the name of Dave Thomas who was on SCTV in the 70s.
There you go.
That's a very common name among our generation.
There
Dave
you
Thomas.
go. There you go. Well, like I said, we want to jump right in. Why don't you tell us about your new book coming out, No Job for a Man? What is the significance of that title?
Well, No Job for a Man is a quote about the acting profession that my father used to attribute to Spencer Tracy.
Okay.
The actor Spencer Tracy.
Yeah,
He used to say that when I decided I wanted to be an actor at the relatively ripe age of 27, 28, my father said, well, I remember what Spencer Tracy said. That's, it's no job for a man. And I thought, all right, well, thanks for the vote of confidence, Dad. So the phrase has stuck with me for better or for worse for years. My father's not with us anymore. But as the book started to take shape, it became more and more clear that I kind of wanted to fill in the question that phrase uses. Well, okay, then what is a job for a man?
Yeah.
And I had been a high school teacher briefly. I had worked in an office. I'd had a bunch of different jobs before I settled on acting. And my father's idea, my father being born in 1937, my father had one very specific idea of what men do.
Right.
And it probably did not involve if you got up at 5:45 a.m., it wasn't so you could rush into the makeup chair.
Right.
And so I don't think I'm particularly a total outlier as an actor and comedian who bumped heads with his father occasionally.
Yeah.
But this is my version of that story. It's not like a slam piece on my dad by any means. It's
Right.
just,
No, I get it.
Yeah.
My dad, who's no longer with us.
Generational.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
My
That's
dad,
exactly
who's
what
no
it is.
longer with us, used to say the same thing to me. He would bring people to the house to discourage me from becoming an entertainer because I'm a singer as well.
I know. Yeah.
So why don't you describe?
But you were singing. When you guys were doing, spiritual music, though, that had to kind of like cool his jets a little bit.
Well, the
right?
funny thing about it is, while we thought we were doing spiritual music, the church that we went to thought that we had gone too far. So we were the black sheep, even of our spiritual communities.
Black sheep. Brum.
Interesting.
So, but you brought
Okay.
your dad up. Why don't you tell us about the environment and your relationship to your dad and
Your
the
journey.
environment in your household growing up?
Well, my dad my dad had a drinking problem. He was not a blackout drunk.
Mm-hmm.
He was not a wake up soaked in his own mess drunk.
Mm-hmm.
But he he had a very erratic personality when he was drinking, and he could be very cheerful and goofy and Johnny Goodtime, and he could also be very maudlin and sad, or he could be very angry, and it was very much what we would now call random shuffle. Before we had such a technological term. It was also the New York City of the 1970s, which was that city was also on random shuffle at the time. There's times where it was the most exciting place on earth, and there were times where it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
And I have likened it occasionally to growing up inside your own bully. It was a daunting time. I got mugged a couple times. The house got broken into a couple times.
Wow.
Not while we were in it, thank God. But there you come home to find your house ransacked, even once. It happened to us twice. That can sort of it sets a really weird tone. It just it
removes
makes
the feeling of safety. The feeling of safety is just gone.
Without being injured, you feel violated. It's a weird, like nothing safe.
In the book, there's not even a joke, but like there's a bit in the book about how, if asked whether getting mugged or getting burglarized is worse, God forbid you ever have to make a preference. But at the end of the day, after you get mugged, you can at least go home and kind of, take a hot bath. But you get burglarized, the home is the home.
Right,
Nothing
exactly.
Is, somebody was sitting on your bed going through your stuff.
Right.
It's a
You got to take
feeling,
off your clothes to get in that hot shower. So
John-
you're the most vulnerable.
John, you referenced weed. Did you have siblings?
No, it's just my for the time being that it was three of us in that apartment. I'm
Okay.
an only child.
Okay.
There was my mom and my dad until my dad moved out when I was 7.
Okay.
I don't know what went wrong. I'm kidding. I can name it. But yeah, he I think, and this is the really important and kind of interesting thing about my father, is that I think deep down in a place where his heritage just wouldn't let him go, he also harbored dreams of being an entertainer of some type or another. And again, I don't think that's a particularly, I think there's a lot of people who could say that. But he had a very distinct way of turning me on to so much stuff that I love now, so much great TV and movies and music. And but then when I decided to pursue it myself, there was a sense of, well, no, we're fans. We're not practitioners.
Right.
You're not one of the one in the millions.
We don't do this. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, we don't do this. And it wasn't, it was partially, I think it was a certain amount of, he admitted to a certain amount of jealousy. I think it was also a genuine concern for, how unstable this business is. I think it came from a couple different ways, and the book tries to kind of,
paint that picture,
piece that together.
Yeah. Well, you keep mentioning a lot of similarities in our youth and the way we grew up. My dad was also from New York as well. And so we dealt with some of the same types of issues. When did you first realize that it was causing issues for you? Or do you think that was the cause, or do you think that was the trigger?
In late elementary school, I started to have these incredibly intense dizzy spells where they were like, it felt like I was on, like there was an earthquake going on, an incredibly radical earthquake. The earth would go like boom, and I would lose my bearings completely.
Wow.
And they took me to an ear, nose, and throat person. They took me to a neurologist. And finally, they sort of on a whim, they took me to just a GP who was like, this kid is dealing with incredible amounts of anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's the divorce, and it's growing up in the city, and it's just the sort of, not sure which dad is going to show up for custody weekend. There's just a few different things going on here. And what they did at the time, I probably should have gone to therapy, but my parents were at that time of the ilk that like, nah, that's for crazy people.
Right.
Yeah.
That's for capital C crazy people.
Right.
You don't do that. And my mom stayed that way to the end of her days. My dad eventually started to get some help later in life, which, for a guy to go into therapy for the first time in his 50s is impressive.
Yeah.
It is very impressive.
Absolutely.
A guy born in 1937 in particular, and I give him credit for that. So there was issues with anxiety, and then sort of an irrational anger that eventually turned inward. And the book kind of explores those different things that were messing me up.
Wow.
Yeah, well, you know what? The main thing is you turned the corner. And the good news is that it sounds like your dad sought help for his issues as well. And we're going to continue this discussion on the other side of this next break. Don't go anywhere. John Ross Bowie is our guest.
We'll be right back.
It's time for the Mental Health Minute with Marla and Dave.
Mental health problems and substance use disorders sometimes occur together. According to mentalhealth.gov, this is because certain illegal drugs can cause people with an addiction to experience one or more symptoms of a mental health problem. Or sometimes mental health problems can lead to alcohol or drug use, as some people with a mental health problem may misuse these substances as a form of self-medication. There's also a factor of mental and substance use disorders share some underlying causes, including changes in brain composition, genetic vulnerabilities, and early exposure to stress or trauma.
More than 1 in 4 adults living with serious mental health problems also has a substance use problem. Substance use problems occur more frequently with certain mental problems, including depression, anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, and personality disorders.
If you or anyone you know is dealing with the dual diagnosis of a substance use disorder and another mental health condition, please, and we say again, please seek professional help. Don't try to do this on your own.
This message has been brought to you by Mental Health Mondays with Marla and Dave.
I never do anything without thinking about it first.
Marla is a feeler.
I basically live my personality on my sleeve.
But when Marla and Dave get together, it's like a match dancing with a firecracker.
All right, we are back just like we promised on the other side of that break.
I have to tell you, John, it's so hard for when I see your name, I don't know how to not say Bowie, and it's Bowie, and yes,
it's Bowie, and that too takes us back to my father, Bruce Bowie, a proud son of Scottish immigrants who insisted that's the way the name is pronounced.
Okay.
So
well, you learned.
You could take it up with him wherever you like.
That would be very spooky. I don't think I'm gonna wait on that one.
Let's all join hands, guys.
I'll wait on that one.
Turn down the lights. Anyway, so John, you were telling us how you first started recognizing, I guess, was that anxiety that you were dealing with?
It was definitely anxiety, and it was very pervasive, and eventually I spent a lot of my young years and my teens and a sizable chunk of my adulthood, if I'm honest, with a great deal of anger that was mostly pointed inwards, but eventually, sort of pointed outwards at various, things. Yeah. And sometimes it was, things I should be upset with, reasonable injustices going on in the world. Right. And sometimes it was just the driver in front of me. But in my late 20s, right around sort of quarter life, I started the panic attacks came back in a very pernicious form, and they were followed with this incredible irrational guilt. And then that was coupled with an attendant depression, which I think is pretty common. There's a sense that like, oh, if this is my life now, I am depressed about that. So anxiety and depression are very close cousins, particularly inside my skull. And they, it got to a point where I was at a job. I had a job in an office, and granted, I was not great at the job, didn't enjoy the job particularly, but was reacting irrational. I mean, I was sitting in my cubicle crying. This was more than just like, I don't dig this job.
Right.
This was something far more severe. And at that point, medication had to come into play. I was in therapy finally, and I talked to a psychiatrist for the first time, and I held on to all the same, I think, preconceptions that a lot of people have about medication, which I actually prefer to call medicine because it makes it a little, something about medication is a very stigmatizing phrase.
Right,
like mental illness.
He's on medication.
Yes, yes.
He's medicated.
John
Why are they always
medicine.
speak in those hushed tones?
He's on medication.
With the
His
eyebrows.
medication isn't working. If it's medicine, then that might as well be NyQuil.
Right.
Did you take your medicine? Exactly. Like it's a dose.
Medicine.
Right.
Yeah.
So I started taking medicine in my late 20s.
I like it.
And that was a whole separate thing because not everything works for everyone. It's a matter of chemistry.
Yeah.
There's a few different approaches to treating depression anxiety disorder. Predominantly it's SSRIs, but there's a fair amount of difference inside that class, the class that includes, Paxil and Prozac and Zoloft.
Seroquel and all those,
guys. Yeah. There's the MAOI inhibitors. I can't remember what that stands for, but they can they're counterindicated against a bunch of other things. It's a whole sort of process you have to go through to find what works for
titration
you.
is a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I had to kind of hustle through that a little bit and figure that out and, figure out whether Ativan was going to make me unemployable.
Yeah.
There were a few things that had to be ironed out, but I find that if you talk about it in strictly medical terms, if you talk about like, oh, I need this particular drug because my brain burns off serotonin at a faster rate than normal people, and as such, I need to take a pill which slows that burn off. You put it in those terms, and it becomes much less stigmatized.
So now what I have to stop you here and just ask this question.
Go ahead.
That requires some information to be able to relay that to a doctor. In other words, so where were you with that in finding out, collecting this information as to how your brain was functioning, what was going on chemically in your body, and what you needed?
Well, you have the chain of command, Ron. I showed up at the doctor and said, "Hi, I'm crazy now. What's going on?" And he explained to me what was going on in with.
But
the,
you were
the
willing at that
levels of-
point to actually learn this, like you took this in.
I was willing. I took it in, and I found it very soothing because otherwise, it's like, oh, I have literal demons behind my
Right.
eyes.
Yeah.
You know, what is going on? Should I be burned at the stake? You know, and if you can take that edge off, and again, not to overuse the word, you take that stigma off, and you're left with a chemical imbalance that is akin to people whose bodies don't produce insulin properly, or people who live with chronic pain and have to deal with nerve damage through a very precise cocktail of painkillers or what have you. You put it in those terms, and there's no other way to put it. You feel less crazy.
Right.
You know, it puts it in very stark medical terms, and I found that remarkably soothing. And this was 98, so I didn't have super fast internet, but I had fast enough that I could read articles.
Right.
And it was just starting to come, you know, it was a few years after that book, Listening to Prozac, came out, and Elizabeth Wurzel's Prozac Nation. It was starting to come into the zeitgeist a little bit more, and it was still kind of looked askance, and I didn't mention it to my coworkers very much, but there were some people I could talk to who, we'd sort of be in hushed tones, like, are you trying this? Are you
get that medication? You get that?
Can you try this? They say Zoloft works really quickly. And that was so it's never a great time to go through a really severe depressive episode, but the late 90s were not a terrible time to do so.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
with all the information that you have, though, and you said something earlier, were you ever offended? Were there certain things that were said to you, like if someone used the word crazy, were you like, hey, like, is there a stigma that stuck out to you more?
No, that wasn't. No one actually came out, and that was just my interior monologue, fortunately. But what you did hear were variations on, what do you have to be depressed about?
Right.
Or, what do you mean you don't think you deserve food? Which was one rather gnarly side effect of my anxiety. And that troubled me, and that smacked of a striking lack of empathy.
Yeah.
But I also think it's still a very common misconception.
Exactly.
So I guess one of the things that you just brought up with, you felt that you didn't deserve food. Now, is that because of the anxiety? Was that because you didn't have an appetite, or you literally felt like
was that driven?
You were punishing yourself.
I was punishing myself. It was a way. It wasn't rooted the way a traditional eating disorder would be rooted in, like a weight or a vanity thing. It was sort of it was an indirect. I hesitate to say self-harm because it's a very loaded term, but it was definitely a way for me to punish myself for sins real and imagined.
Yeah, so instead of being body dysmorphia based, it was more, like you said, a punitive thing. Personality dysmorphia.
I'm a terrible person. Anyone who disagrees with me is a fool or a liar. And so much of depression is they in the simplest terms, it's so much just anger pointing inward.
Right.
And that anger is eventually going to be heard, and sometimes it leads to people actually cutting their arms, so their outsides feel as bad as their insides. Right. I never did that, but there was a real sense of, like, I don't deserve to have lunch today. Right. I should just sit here and be miserable. And I lost a bunch of weight. Really had a hell of a time sleeping. It was a really tough road. I don't think it's really been that bad ever since.
So, John, hold that thought right there. We're going to come right back after this break.
Okay.
All right, the fun music, we're going to slip right past Marla's dancing because
Today
she's
I'm just
doing
gonna
sort
be
of
a
a head
bobblehead.
nod. We're both pretty tired today. You might not notice because of our fun, bouncy exterior.
And my makeup.
Yeah. But this is the poll question break. Marla, what was the poll question last week?
Last week, and we have to have John perk up because, of course, you're always invited to answer this as well. Last week, we asked our guests and everyone who's listening, what is the most difficult mental illness to treat? Depression, ADHD, or borderline personality disorder, BPD? You have a thought?
Off the top of my head, BPD is still so misunderstood and is such a weird cornucopia of symptoms that I bet that's the one that they have the hardest time treating.
Ding,
I bet behind
ding.
door number 1, John, you've won a new car.
Contact Oprah.
Yeah, except it's really
the
like
least satisfying quiz to get right.
Exactly.
I don't feel good figuring that out.
Exactly.
There's no sense of accomplishment that comes with it.
Yeah. Well, you know what? You know a lot about borderline personality disorder more than most. So the question for this week, John, I'll take a gander at this one. What percentage of state prisoners have a recent history of a mental health condition? 11%, 17%, or 31%?
Are we counting addiction issues among mental health conditions?
I would say yes.
Then I'd go with I'd say the highest one. I'd say 31.
Okay, so now here's the trick about this
you
answer.
will have to tune in next week.
Just like we gave the results from last week's for the first question, you got to check us out again next week to see if
you fall
2
into
for 2.
a 100%.
If you're still batting 1,000.
I will. I'm excited.
There you go. We want to remind you guys to text the word GIVE, GIVE, to 818-698-1021. Back to the show.
Who's playing that piano?
Yeah. Did you see my hands moving? I'm sorry.
I just at the end of that, I was like, what? Anyway, random weird Marla thoughts just fly out sometimes. Anyway, so John, what you have been sharing with us, and by the way, I'm in the chat room, and nothing but praise. Great guest. Love the show. Oh wow, you just basically, and I think that. What I want to say is I'm always grateful for what I call the chain link conversations that we're beginning to have so regularly, because your experience is an eye opener to someone else who's struggling to figure out what it is. Like you're not feeling your best, or even if you don't know that. Here's the one thing I've learned by just experiencing our family. What you do know is that what's happening to relationships and your goals and things that are obstacles based on something you don't understand or can't control, it requires some amount of attention and change. And so I think that I hear that in what you've been sharing.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, it really, when I started going through this. Anybody who could reach out with any amount of common ground helped a lot. I specifically remember this was the most random coincidence, and it was a lifesaver. I left my psychiatrist's office for the first time, with a prescription in my shaking hand. I step out of the lobby and I ran into a friend.
Wow.
I ran into somebody I knew.
Wow.
And she had been going for a while. I started crying because I'm an alpha. You can just take one look at me. I started big time crying, and I wonder if she remembers that. We're still we're like sort of social media in touch,
right.
and I wonder if she remembers that. But that tiny little moment of like, oh look, there's somebody else in this dark tunnel, and I know them. That's great. Was everything to me, and I try to pay that forward as often as I can.
Well, we appreciate that. So the book is coming out this fall. Is that my understanding?
That is correct.
No Job for a Man. And will that be available everywhere where we consume our literary treats?
It will be everywhere. It'll probably be the sort of book that is spine forward rather than face forward,
I
but
love
you will
it.
be able to find it. It will be under the B's, not the R's. And I also just signed the deal for the audio book. So that's
Nice.
I love
so
it. I love it.
If you can put up with this deep yet nasal tone, I will have several hours of talking.
Oh, you're going to read it yourself. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Well, no, Keith David wasn't available, so I'm stepping in. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Hilarious. I think that it's going to be amazing. I could listen to you read, just so you know.
Well,
Very
before
sweet.
we
Very
go,
sweet.
you had a very interesting parting message that I was reading. Tell us about it.
Well, the thing I always tell people about episodes like this and the thing about depression is you can only go through a severe depressive episode for the first time once. That's a lot of words. Let me explain. What I mean by that is the first time you go through a depressive episode, a serious capital D depressive episode where you just, don't know what's going on at all. And you can't sleep, but you're constantly tired and maybe there's anxiety plaguing you. That's terrifying. That feels like your body's on fire while you are simultaneously drowning in mud. It is not a good time. But then hopefully you get through that.
Yeah.
Through whether it's medicine, talk therapy, exercise, diet, however you get there. And then the next time it comes up, it still sucks, but it's not as scary as the first time. Because
Right.
you know you've been through it before.
Yeah, I love
You
that.
can only go through that really scary episode for the first time, one
Once.
time.
I love that. So things do get better even when it seems pretty dark. The book is No Job for a Man. Our guest has been John Ross Bowie.
And where can we find you right quick on social
Indeed.
media before we go?
I am at John Ross Bowie on Instagram, and I am inexplicably at John Ross Bowie on TikTok, although I'm way too old for that platform. What am I doing?
You love those dances, John.
It's the dances. I'm there for the dances. Yeah, and my makeup tutorials.
There you go. Oh, man.
You've been amazing. Thank you for being a
Indeed.
guest on Mental Health Monday.
God bless you guys. Thank
See
you so
you
much for
guys.
having me.
Indeed.